Hey, what's up? My name's Rob, and today we're going to be looking at designing and building a queen size bed. Now there's quite a lot to cover, so let's get into it. Now this bed's going to be for my sister, but like any good client, she started by sending me a few photos of the style that she's after. I think what we're looking at here is a mission style bed with a wooden slat frame. She wants the headboard to be good for sitting up against for reading in bed, which means the size and positioning of those slats is going to be really important. She's also quite keen on the large footboard that these have, and has said that it'd be good if the top capping was wide enough to rest a mug or a cup on. The major limitation that we're dealing with here is that the bed needs to have enough room to slide a trundle bed in underneath. And what that means is we need to raise the height of the side rail up to around 350 mils to get that kind of clearance. And so proportionally that's going to move all the other dimensions of the bed slightly up as well. So now with all that in mind, it's time to move on to 3D modeling and work up a few concepts. Now the vaguest part of the brief was to look for the slats on the head and the footboard. So with this first set of renders, I'm really trying to dial that in. And the easiest way to approach that is to give the client a spectrum of what they've asked for. So with this first set, I've done slightly narrower slats than what I think look good. And then I've gone too wide. And then I've done about the size that I think they're looking for. We spoke earlier of the backrest being comfortable to lean against, and you can very clearly see here that the narrower sets with the smaller gaps in between look much more comfortable than the wider gap slats. And that's why an exercise like this is important, because even if you know what's going to work out best in terms of comfort and looks, it gives a chance for the client to visually understand that as well. So in this next development, you can see I haven't changed it that much. She was happy with the overall look and proportions of the bed, but I have increased the number of slats slightly and flush fitted the capping on the head and the footboards. I think this gives the profile a cleaner, more modern look. At this point too, I should probably talk about the materials I plan on using. Because I'm doing this as economically as possible, I'll be using dimensioned pine lumber, so everything here is made from 6x2s, 4x2s and 4x1s. Now that I've settled on the design, I can start pulling out dimensions so I can put together a materials list and a cut list. An exploded view is also really helpful in visualizing all of this. Alright, with that all done, let's crack into the build. Now even though I started with dimension lumber, it still had its milling marks on it, so every piece had to have a quick trip through the thicknesser. What you're seeing here is the 4 leg posts being marked out for mortising. These are all 4x2s that have been glued together to make 4x4s. It's a lot cheaper to buy that way, and though I don't like having the join marks showing, I don't think it's that bad. Now this relatively simple operation actually took quite a lot of prep work to get right. Here in New Zealand we have such a small population, it's not easy to get affordable woodworking gear. The bit I'm using to make this mortise is actually a 1/2 inch end mill rather than being a specific mortising router bit. I'm not 100% sure on the difference, but the end mill option was like 3 times cheaper. I was still experimenting with the best way to cut using this bit. I started by plunging a hole at each of the ends of the mortise and then worked my way back and forth in between, getting deeper and deeper. I later found that the bit operated slightly better by taking a full depth plunge and nibbling my way across, which I think you'll see me do later. Now I'm cutting the tenons into all of the rails. You can see my setup's not exactly pro, but I just went slow and careful and worked with what I had. It's that age-old question, round the tenons or square the mortises. I can say that rounding the tenons would have been way faster, but I was worried about losing tolerances on my fit. This was my first time doing mortise and tenon joinery, so I just took my time and didn't try anything fancy. I'm doing a dry fit of the head and the footboard rails into the legs. Everything went relatively smoothly, so it was time to move on to the slats. Measuring up and fitting the slats, there was slight bowing in one of the rails, so I had to make some of the slats slightly longer to follow that curve. It isn't noticeable visually, but it meant I had to have an order of which slats went where, and that just added another level of complexity. The long side rails were too big for me to cut the tenons on the table saw, so I'm making some floating tenons by mortising into the end of the rail. This is where I use my full depth nibble technique. It looks super sketchy, but I'm using the edge of the bench as a flat surface to stay relatively stable. It's more just uncomfortable to use the router like this because all the controls are in the wrong place. And here I'm just fitting in that floating tenon. These 2x2 rails are what the mattress slats are going to be fixed to, and they're just glued and screwed onto the main side rails. And it's just started raining, so I gotta scramble and get everything back inside. Doing a dry fit of the side rails into the leg mortises. I tried to make these a little looser because they'd be held in by brackets rather than glued, so that I can keep the head and the footboard separate for transportation and installation. Now instead of purchasing brackets, which was going to be kind of expensive, I decided to use some scrap flat bar that I had lying around and just weld together my own. These guys are going to be way beefier than what I would have been able to buy, and I never pass up an opportunity to practice my welding. I almost didn't include this in the edit because it's so boring, but I want to give a true representation of the project, and unfortunately with woodworking, sanding is a huge, annoying part of it. I'm using a clear water-based polyurethane finish, because I don't like hiding the wood by staining it. It just seems a little deceitful, you know? Gluing the slats in the head and the footboard was a bit of a nightmare, just trying to keep them all straight and aligned, but I got there in the end. Now I'm just gluing the legs into the headboard and the footboard. The final piece is the capping that runs across the top of the head and the footboard. I'd left this until the end because I wasn't exactly sure how it was going to look with everything else. And I'm just using biscuits and glue to hold it in place. It's the day of the install. This is like 7:30 on a Saturday morning, so I'm sluggishly giving a final sand at 500 grit for that silky smooth finish. And here we are at my sister's flat. My nephew Connor, he's giving me a hand putting it together. good right there. Hey, looks good. Job done. I realized the lighting was pretty dim in there and the camera was really struggling, but here's a few close-ups of the finished bed. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something. Feel free to leave a comment or a like. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. It really helps, as I think the sharing of information benefits everyone.